Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Business Council for Sustainable Energy, the Plant-Based Products Council, the U.S. Green Building Council, and the Demand Response and Smart Grid Coalition's COP26 side event, virtual side event. It's so exciting to be in this studio today, where we're going to talk about powering forward in the critical decade. And we're going to hear from these great business leaders in the energy, built environment, and circular economy sectors, both here in the room and our friends online back home in the States, and actually one in Glasgow. By way of brief introduction, the BCSE is a coalition of companies and trade associations from the energy efficiency, natural gas, energy storage, renewable energy, and sustainable transportation sectors in the United States. Established in 1992 in advance of the first Earth Summit, the Council advocates for policies that expand the use of commercially available clean energy technologies, products, and services. Our main message here at COP is that we do not need to wait to take action to make significant emissions reductions. We can achieve greater global ambition with existing clean energy and energy efficiency solutions and sustainability approaches. It is time to focus on implementation and to make at scale the investments in our economies, infrastructure, and communities to reduce emissions, create new jobs, and strengthen our resilience. With that, I am pleased to introduce my colleague Dan Delury, Senior Fellow for Energy and Climate, Institute for Energy and the Environment at the Vermont Law School, and long-time colleague of the Business Councils, to moderate this panel. So over to you, Dan.
All right, thank you, Laura. I want to second Laura's welcome to all of you viewing this, whether you're viewing it live with us today in Glasgow or whether you're seeing it at some future date in the archive. But what I'm going to do is allow everyone to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their organization or their company, as the case may be. And once we've done that, we'll come back around and we'll answer some questions. And we'll answer your questions if you have them. We have some that we would like to ask each other, I know that. But if you are watching online and you have a question, then you'll see there on the platform that there is a raise your hand function or button. And that's the way you signal to the folks here that are helping us produce this that you have a question. And we'll let you go live with your question. But with that, you heard my introduction. I'll just add to that one of my specialties, and the reason I come to COPS is to talk about grid modernization and the importance of the intersection of that and climate change. I used to talk more about mitigation and what it means for the integration of renewable energies and other types of new sources of the distributed energy type, but also now in terms of resilience and what it means for that. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But I'm going to turn first to Rebekah to tell us who she is a little bit further and her company.
Thank you. So my name is Rebekah Toleen. I serve as the Chief Sustainability Officer for the Tennessee Valley Authority, which is the largest public power provider in the United States. We serve local power companies that serve around 10 million people, electricity in the states. And we're happy to say we've reduced our carbon emissions by 60% from 2005 levels and are on path and have a plan to reach 70% within the decade as well. So excited to join the conversation today and to get started.
All right, thanks. Liz?
I'm Liz Beardsley. I'm Senior Policy Counsel at the U.S. Green Building Council. We're a mission-based organization with members from all across the building sector, as well as state and local government agencies and federal agencies. And we're working to create buildings and communities that are healthy, resilient, and sustainable through platforms including our LEAD program, education, credentials, and convenings, and of course, advocacy and policy, where I sit.
Excellent.
All right, Ashley, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Ashley Allen. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer of Oatly. Oatly is a company that produces oat-based products, such as oat drinks, oat ice cream, and lots of other delicious things. And if you ask our CEO, he will tell you, no, we're not a food company, we're a sustainability company. And that's really signifies our focus on sustainability and on pushing toward a transition for a more sustainable, climate-smart food system.
All right, and as Laura said, we've got a couple of people joining us virtually today, and let's turn to Jessica.
Hi, thanks, Dan. Jessica Bowman. I'm the Executive Director of the PlantBased Products Council, or PBPC. We're an association based in the U.S., and we represent a broad spectrum of companies and organizations, all of which are supporting increased adoption of renewable plant-based products, really seen as key to shifting our global economy toward a circular framework. So we work on behalf of those companies and organizations, helping people better understand plant-based products, their benefits from an economic and environmental standpoint, and advocating for.
All right, thanks. And can we turn to David?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. A little bit of background noise here. I'm sitting in the green zone looking over at the blue zone where everybody's seated today. Lots of excitement over here. So my name is David McClain. I'm here in a number of capacities. I am the chair of the Best Practices Committee for the Texas chapter of the U.S. Green Building Council. And it's my privilege to work with our best practice champions as we go into the community and help others emulate those successes that we have. And I just got an announcement. I have to plug this. Our best practice app, which we entered into the Climathon Houston 2021 competition, won first place yesterday, so that's pretty exciting. I'm here also in my capacity as a director of commercial and residential deployment for Clear Value, which is a clean tech company that is working to take any stack and decarbonize it and to create clean energy in the infrastructure that we have and the infrastructures that will be built. So thank you.
All right, thank you, David, and congratulations on that event that you just announced. I'm sure there's a lot of virtual clapping going on right now on the web, and
there is,
as well as from future viewers. Two important announcements here, which hopefully will keep you all glued to this session as it unfolds. Number one is no PowerPoints. We're just going to have a chat among ourselves and with you, if you'd like. Second is, I think what you just quickly assessed here is the diversity of this panel and the diversity of the Business Council itself. I mean, you've got a couple of people that are more perhaps oriented towards utilities. You've got people that are talking about buildings and the other side of the meter and the importance of decarbonization there. And then you've also got the folks from the agricultural food-based wing of all of this. And so I think that's going to be on display here, is how we all have common objectives, but there are obviously sectoral differences in terms of what we can do or what we want to do and so on. So the first thing we're going to talk about, which is the thing that, at least in my case here at the COP, I get asked about by anyone who is not from the U.S., and that is what's happening in the U.S. And I think the whole world knows that policy has been front and center in the U.S. at the federal level in our Congress as two major bills have proceeded through our Congress that both address climate change in different ways, and we'll talk about that a little bit. The one that's called Infrastructure Bill is significant in not only its size, over $1 trillion devoted to infrastructure, but for the first time, you see other types of infrastructure other than the traditional types being included. And by traditional, I mean roads and bridges and things like that. For the first time, in the case of electricity, for example, you have electricity infrastructure being included. So we're going to talk a little bit about that bill, which looks like it's on the glide path to a signature by President Biden. The other bill, which goes by different names, the one that you'll hear it called, which is sort of a procedural bureaucratic name, but you may see it in the news, and that's called the Reconciliation Bill. That is considered to be the true climate bill, although it's not only about climate. It talks about healthcare and education and includes massive funding for all of those. That's the one that, to be fair, might be said to be a little bit more tentative than the first one, but it's still on its own type of glide path. And I think those of us who will be talking here all expect that that one will happen as well. And so what I'd like to do is maybe turn to each of you and staying on the topic of policy and maybe addressing those bills, or maybe not. Is there something in this legislation that will be important to your area? If not, what should be in one of these bills that would help that? And if there's nothing in either of these bills for you, then what is it that you want or need on the policy front? So, Rebekah, once again, you want to start us off on this? Great.
Happy to jump in on this one. We're very excited about the bipartisan infrastructure bill passing. Like you said, I think it's a major step forward for the United States when it comes to our addressing climate issues. And clearly that's true for the energy sector. So there is significant investment coming for the energy sector in things like grid modernization. Also, not only just R&D of new technologies. If you talk to most utilities, they will tell you there's a pretty clear path to reductions up to around 80%. You can make that happen. After that, without new technologies, new storage, it gets a lot more tentative. This bill is supporting that R&D and that development and the deployment of those technologies on the ground. So we're very excited about that, and we're looking forward to partnering with DOE and others to get some of that technology on the ground. Obviously, the energy sector is not just trying to decarbonize our demand now, but we're getting ready to electrify a lot more of the economy, right? And so this investment is very important to moving forward. So we're really excited about the next few years. I think we're going to be all running flat out, I think, for a while.
Yeah, I think in the infrastructure bill, the amount said to be devoted to the electricity or grid modernization is on the order of $27 billion, with some of that being straight out-and-out funding and other being an increased loan authority.
That's right. We're seeing the delivery mechanisms in a lot of different ways in the bills, which is interesting. But I think you see that focus from Congress and others about we need to move to solutions and deployment, which is really exciting.
Right. And I think the other thing is, again, to bring in resilience into this. And I think it's yet to be seen exactly how all of this money will have any sort of resiliency criteria applied to how it's spent or what, but I think that's an important thing that a lot of us will be looking for. So let's turn to Ashley and Jessica next in your sector. Anything in the infrastructure bill for you or this other, what I'll call, again, the reconciliation bill?
Well, you know, I think for Oatly, our message here is really about let's take action in the food sector. And I think what will probably surprise people in our audience is that, you know, while I really feel hopeful and confident about the progress that the world and the U.S. has made in the energy sector, and it's so promising to see this big movement in the infrastructure sector, we don't see nearly as much action and attention in the food sector. So my sights are going to be set on, you know, future bills that are looking a bit more at what are we doing to support farmers in the U.S., obviously, but also in other places, to really take on regenerative agricultural practices, and what are policymakers doing to make sure that the 1/3 of global emissions that the food sector is responsible for are also getting supported through these changes? Because of course there's overlap between that food system and the energy system and infrastructure, and so we just want to make sure that the food system isn't somehow lost.
No, and I want to add to that, and excuse me, Jessica, for interrupting here, but I'm an energy guy, as I think all of you know, but over the past couple of years, I've spent a lot of time moderating sessions like this with people like you, And my eyes have been opened to the agriculture and food sector in terms of its importance in climate. And I think it is the one that people need to know a lot more about. Yeah. But Jessica, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. I would really echo much of what Ashley said, that there is so much focus on energy transition, but I think it's been estimated up to 45% of greenhouse gas emissions come from how we make and use products and food. And so I think there's been growing attention to that area, but more is needed, and that's where I think the products that my members make come in. And just to explain things a little, then I'll sort of bring it back to your original question about the bills that are moving. When we talk about plant-based products, we're talking about taking renewable inputs, things like corn, hemp, ag waste materials, grasses, and turning those into products, everything from plastics to textiles to cleaning products, furniture. So many products that we make and use every day can be made from renewable inputs. The other kind of important piece of it is that a number of these products at their end of life are compostable. And that sort of goes back a little bit to some of the food pieces, which is if you can use a compostable product in food packaging or in a food service application, you can help divert some of that food waste away from landfills where it's contributing to significant landfill methane emissions. And then you can create compost, which has great soil benefits, helps improve soil's role as a carbon sink. So when it comes to some of the policy work that we're focused on, there are, I would say in the two bills, there are a couple buckets that I think kind of help support composting. It's an important thing to us because there's a lot of composting facilities, at least in the US, maybe 5,000, but most of them just take yard waste. There's a really small fraction that take all compostable materials, including packaging, including food waste. So there's some real opportunity there. And we've been working with a broader coalition in trying to get some federal support for funding to help expand composting infrastructure to take these broader materials and help get these materials out of landfills or incinerators and really help turn them into a value-added product. And this is the circular economy, sort of showing the circular economy. So we're focused on supporting these some opportunities within the bills that I think would help support composting, but thinking beyond that too, to opportunities to help incentivize plant-based products. They're often these nascent products that are competing with fossil fuel-based products. So how do we create a more level playing field for those products? We're also working to help support modernization and growth of USDA's BioPreferred program, which is a program that supports federal procurement of bio-based products, but also help to raise sort of the general market and consumer awareness of plant-based products. And then just overall sort of research and data that helps demonstrate the environmental and economic benefits of plant-based products.
All right, thanks, Jessica. Let's go to the building sector. And Liz, if I'm using the wrong descriptor, if you want to expand on that, please go ahead. But let's hear from you and Dave on that.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And I'm glad to go last because I'll just point out before talking about the bills that, buildings, well, first of all, they are infrastructure, so it's nice to see that recognized now. But also they can help support better food and waste practices, not to mention energy practices. So, when we design buildings that make it easier to compost, that reduce waste, and that prioritize plant-based and bio-based materials, not just in construction, but also throughout operations, that can help reinforce all of that climate action and activity in the markets for those things. So that's really an important role of buildings, better buildings. But as far as the bipartisan bill, we are really happy that to see that.
That's another name for the infrastructure bill. Yes,
the infrastructure bill. We'll stipulate that for today. The infrastructure bill really is a positive step forward, and a lot of focus on energy, but buildings is in there, and it's now, we spend 90% of our time, living and working and learning in buildings, so it's really key to see that included. And most of the building pieces do have a climate angle to them. So we have money for schools to do energy efficiency and renewable energy investment. There's funding for airports, terminals, so that is traditional, but yet it has criteria for sustainability and energy efficiency. So that's really positive, seeing that, that green lens applied to some of those things. There's funding for federal buildings to increase efficiency and do some deep retrofits. And there's some other programs too that will go, like weatherization program for low-income housing that will flow through the states, and a number of other things. And of course, it's the reconciliation bill, the second bill that has not passed yet, and when we're hopeful has just, it kind of explodes on a whole bunch of those areas. So adding funding for home rebates, including training for auditors and retrofit people, the workforce, so addressing workforce issues there. More funding for federal buildings to leverage with the private sector to do performance contracts and get more resilient and deeper efficiency retrofits for federal buildings. And really, we could go on and on. I don't want to take too much time, but there's a lot in there for buildings.
Yeah, those are good examples that I think convey the types of improvements that will be funded by that bill. So thanks. Now, Dave, I'm going to give you the option if you want to, because I'm familiar with your state work. And Liz has talked about federal, so you can pile on if you wish and talk about the federal bills, or if you'd like to talk about state policy. And I want to extend that to my other panelists as well, if that's an area you'd like to come back to in later comments. And I think we need...
There we go.
There
All
we
right,
go.
so I'm unmuted and we're making great
great
announcements in the back. And so I like to actually focus this a little bit different, like to look at the macro and the micro level. That's kind of the federal and the state. But from a business perspective, on both of those, in my capacity as providing solutions to decarbonize existing infrastructures, the way we do stuff, not having to impart a huge change to a huge organization that employs a lot of people. That's both of these bills and even the previous one that had to do with COVID relief all get us to focus on the end product, which is providing safe, healthy, efficient, and prosperous places to live, learn, work, and play, where humans and nature can thrive. And that's really what all of this is driving to, and which is the focus of everything that I do and our team does, and most of the people I interact with. On a micro level, policy, I work with, I'm up in front of the Texas State Legislature, and you might have heard a little bit in the news about stuff that's going on there. It's a challenge.
If you'd like to see this, please make your way outside.
All right. They have really good programs over here, by the way. So, I mean, at the state level, obviously we have challenges with any policy that's rolled out at the federal level. But it's even more complicated than that, because we have policies that are rolled out at the state level, and they have to be ratified by each individual municipality. So as all of these things trickle down, the time that it takes to make these things happen, what we really focus on is creating, through economic analysis and powerful data aggregation and visualizations, training those professionals that are in the built environment and the municipalities and the people that are actually going to be doing the work, how to internalize these policies and create the business case for training and bringing on the right people to do these things. That's the hard work of this. I love everything that I see in all of these policies, but realistically, even if the trigger was pulled today, we are 5 years out from that being implemented in a meaningful manner in almost every town in Texas.
Yeah, thank you. And I meant to thank you before now for speaking to us from what appears to be a secure, undisclosed location.
Yeah, it is.
So, at any rate, yeah, thanks for putting that additional spin on it, is that it's one thing to get these gobs of money in a bill like the infrastructure bill, but then the question is, how to not just spend it efficiently and correctly, but how to spend it rapidly I mean, if we tie it together towards the climate objectives and decarbonization and emissions reduction objectives, then we want to do this as fast as possible. And going back to all of the things that you listed out for your sector, Liz, that's a lot. I mean, some of those programs exist, but not at that scale. And others, I think, could be said to not really exist yet. And that will be a challenge.
Yeah, I think what is hopeful for me is seeing how much more collaboration there is happening right now. Maybe not every state, but in general, like federal, state, and local governments are talking a lot more. I know many states are preparing for those funds, even not knowing if they're certain.
Right.
Trying to come up with plans now so that they'll be ready and that they can, because they don't want to just use the money. They want it to be effective. People really care. We want to be accountable and be able to show these results, 2, 3, 4 years out in actually emission numbers. So, and the utilities are great partners in the private sector. So really getting, I think, everyone talking the same language, talking early, and figuring out how to stack these things to make them work.
Yeah, let's pivot back to the utility sector for a moment. And maybe the first thing, just quickly, I mean, you're TVA, you're a unique utility in your own right in the U.S. There are different types of utilities in the U.S., and that can mean different things in terms of policy and decarbonization. So maybe to clarify that for the audience, but also, getting back to policy and maybe, what utilities and the electricity sector want. I mean, even with the large amounts of infrastructure spending to be devoted to the electricity sector, it could be said to be a little bit of a drop in the bucket in terms of what is really needed to upgrade and make the grid more modern and reliable. So a couple of handoffs to you there.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think those are great points. So first on your point, just around I'll start with the amount of work that's going to need to be done in the utility industry. Just thinking about the amount that will have to be invested in the transmission grid and modernizing that grid to handle a very different generation makeup, right? And so I think the point made about time is especially true in the utility industry, right? It takes time to get permits, get things built, get things on the ground. We have supply chain challenges ahead of us. And so when the utility industry, 10 years is a short planning phase for us, right? And so what we are starting to talk about is 2035. That's what we're starting to talk about, right? And trying to get all of these solutions. One thing I've noticed about COP26, it's been mostly about solutions, right? And that's very exciting. But to take those back and get them on the ground is going to take partnerships with private, public, and permit regulators, all of us moving the same direction. And so I think that one of the things that concerns me is making sure we can get all of these things lined up to start executing so that we hit that decade out goals that we have. And so that's one thing. TVA is unique. We are a public power provider. The United States has a lot of investor-owned utilities around the country with shareholders and those sorts of things. We're not one of those entities. We're actually a federal agency, which means we're looking forward to partnering closely with this administration, especially as next few years as we design the next steps to get us past that 80% reduction. And so we also, we manage a river system. We work a lot with our agricultural base in the valley. And the great thing is the excitement of all of those entities, whether it's our connected communities work, our agriculture work, our power work, everybody is excited and everybody feels empowered. Shifting that to all moving the same direction, all being coordinated efficiently, not only just thinking about the one farmer or the one building or the one power project, but the coordinated effort, that's where the rubber's going to meet the road. That's where it's going to mean we have to do a lot of communicating, a lot of talking, and a lot of working together. So Maybe not what we've done historically,
Yeah.
but in the future, that's definitely where we have to go if we want to meet these goals.
Yeah, and again, to emphasize the speed of things, here at COP, you have an opportunity to drop in on just about any type of session you can imagine. But in trying to find my way here to this room, I happened upon a rather large event, and it was a press conference about the latest gap report from the UNFCCC. And that's really an eye-opener. And when we talk about pledges and targets and the speed necessary to achieve them, we're going to have to really coordinate a lot to make this happen. But as has been evident in comments so far, this is not just about policy, it's about business. This is the Business Council, after all. And so there are sustainability businesses, as you called Oatly in your introduction, Ashley. And so, from a business standpoint, and you're a newcomer on the scene, it's not like you're a conversion, at least as I understand it. You're a new company, correct?
In North America, relatively new, but we've been around in Sweden for 30 years. So the plant-based transition is happening in some countries, but we need that full global effort.
Okay, but it is a business, and I assume it wouldn't be around for 30 years if it hadn't been operated as a business.
Well, exactly, and I think what was so striking to me about the timeline that you're talking about in the energy sector is that when we talk about the fact that putting in place investments today could mean that to actually get them in the ground and achieving emissions reductions could take till 2035. We don't have till 2035, right? You talked about the latest gap reports, and I'm reminded about the IPCC report that came out a couple of years ago, reminding us that we have less than a decade to really meet the climate change challenge if we are to avoid the worst impacts, if we are to stay under that 1.5 degree goal. And that's why I think it's so critical to really look at what are the gaps and what are the forgotten sectors. If you would have asked me a year or two ago, I would have included buildings in that sector, in that sort of group of forgotten sectors. And so I'm so glad to see more attention paid to that. And that's why I think it's been frustrating for Oatly and many other food companies and land use organizations that are here at COP that I've been speaking to over the last week, who just noticed that food and agricultural space is still a big gap when it comes to that policy action. And that is so critical because once that is in fact put on the top national policy agendas, it's going to take a while for that money to get where it needs to go. And farmers can't change overnight, right? We have to support farmers through a just transition in a food system change, just like we have to support energy workers in a just transition in the energy system. So all is not lost. We still do have some time, but it just underscores, I think, the urgency and the need for more and more companies to really step forward and show that, we are making products and solutions in this space. We are seeing a demand among consumers and retailers to, provide more circular and plant-based products. And that should also give governments the confidence that this is a sector that should absolutely be part of their climate strategies and their NDCs. That's really, I think, absolutely critical if we're going to keep moving forward.
Yeah, and you mentioned buildings as a forgotten sector, which, Liz, you and I don't like to think of it that way from our work there. But buildings is a different way to slice things and talk about a sector, which I think is not the way people always do it. But on the agricultural sector, I've seen an EPA pie chart which says in the US it's about 10% of emissions, and I've also seen a number of 13% worldwide. But Jessica, I think you used a different number at some point, the number of 45%. Sticks in my head.
Yeah, and it's 33.
And I think
33 for ag and food. I think
one of the things is how you define a sector.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's a challenge for all of us. Again, in some of these sessions and dialogues I've been in, I found that in your sector, that sometimes, the transport is included in that sector. Sometimes it's over in the transportation slice on the pie chart. So, Jessica, can you go back to that number and clarify on that?
Yeah, I think the 45% was products and food, and that included things like cement and steel, and so
Okay.
there's maybe some overlap with buildings, but also some overlap with food. So
Okay.
yeah, I think it's just in kind of what bucket you're putting things in.
Yeah, I mean, whatever it is, it's an important slice. You're in
Yeah.
double digits, whatever the slice is.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's important to think about it as sort of like overlapping circles instead of a slice, because it's not a pie that you can just neatly cut
Right.
into, let's check off that sector, let's check off that
Right.
sector. All of our sectors are collaborating together. But the reason it's important to look at it from a sectoral approach is because the decisions in food are driving, the decisions about what we eat, are driving the energy used to make what we eat, right? So that's why we look at it that way. So that what happens is then in those areas where we have some overlaps, that's where we can really have sort of multiple policy solutions, multiple sector solutions that can help to drive down emissions in those sectors. So it's actually helpful to find where those overlaps take place, and
Yeah.
you can really see, oh, here's where it's actually to our advantage in multiple sectors to
Yeah.
make a change here.
Yeah. So, Jessica, you head up an organization yourself that consists of members that are businesses in the, what should I call it, the plant-based industry? Would that be the correct way, or I want to get my nomenclature correct?
I know
Okay.
there's often, I think, a lot of sort of, I don't want to say confusion. When people think plant-based, they probably automatically think more about foods than they do about products, and that's where we're sort
Thank
of
you for the
coming in, trying to help
clarification.
people
Yeah.
understand. Yeah, absolutely. That you can also use renewable inputs like crops, grasses, seaweeds, other different things to make many of the products that we use every day. So there's some education to be done, and that's where we sort of come in. But I think, you're talking about sort of the business aspects of it, and
Right.
Reflecting on our members and the things that they're doing. And, in addition to sort of what are the environmental benefits, we also know that there's consumer demand. So from the business aspect of like, what do our customers want? What does the market want? There's growing interest in understanding what the sustainability is of the product they're buying, the packaging that it's in. And I think even a growing awareness, especially around packaging now over the last, year and a half, 2 years because of COVID, with so much things getting shipped to your house or takeout food, and people are growing in awareness of all of the stuff that we use every day, and how can that be more sustainable? So, there's the consumer demand, there's that aspect of it, but it's also, it's the right thing to do. And that's, where our members are trying to make products that are meeting these environmental achievements or objectives, and also meeting consumer demand. But there's also economic benefits we're seeing when we're helping to create new markets for some of these products, for the agricultural, for rural America, and providing economic benefits as well. But I think as Ashley was talking about a little bit, and others, is how these things all connect, because we're talking about sustainable agriculture is a really important piece of it. If we're, using crops to make products, still providing food for people, how can we ensure that we're doing that efficiently, we're doing that sustainably? And that's where it is important to have this sort of look at where those overlaps are, that we are all working together and meeting those overall objectives from a sustainability standpoint in general, not just our climate objectives.
Jessica, are there any companies that the viewers might know that, just to kind of give examples of the type of businesses that are involved there?
Yeah. So we have companies that are providing some of those renewable inputs, like a Cargill or ADM. We have companies who are making like bioplastics, like NatureWorks, Novamont, Danimer Scientific. And we even have more consumer-facing companies, like PepsiCo is one of our members. Repurpose is an example of a company that makes like a bioplastic, like cups and plates and things like that you can just buy on Amazon or something. So we're sort of across the board, from who's providing the inputs to the more consumer-facing companies.
All right, thanks. Let's go with the consumer angle for a moment here, and we'll first go to Dave, but then we're going to come back to you, Rebekah, on that. And this is maybe the part where we can all talk a little bit about barriers, whether they need to be solved by market mechanisms, by by some sort of non-policy levers, or whether it's really going to take policy for that to happen. So Dave, to you first, in the kind of work that you do, I mean, it's been ongoing for a while, trying to improve the efficiency and other metrics in buildings. And, so what's different about it today than, say, 20 years ago? And I have my own ideas on that, but I'll look to you. And where does the consumer stand today? Because if we're trying to do this in a speedy fashion, then the other person that has to cooperate is the consumer. They have to be ready to work with us on a speedy timetable in order to achieve these targets. So in the work that you do, what are you finding in terms of, let's say, call them consumer attitudes and willingness to try and improve the building sector?
Wow. Okay. Well, that was a loaded question. So,
and we only have a limited amount of time.
The reality of it is that, So, how many days do we have to talk about that? The reality of it is that energy. Let's just stick on energy efficiency, for example, in the built environment. We've been able to model it, and I've taught energy modeling to engineers that design buildings, and thought that if we could just get down to the minutiae and show everybody how the electrons all lined up, that everybody would say, Eureka, we've got it, and we'd have the most efficient buildings in the world. Well, that's not the reality. The reality of it is that people build buildings on speculation and to make money, and they run buildings to make money, and they'll do things that the inhabitants, the businesses that are in those buildings will pay for. That's it. At the end of the day, you've got to have a business case set up for that. So here's what's changing. And if anything that's come out of COVID that's positive, is people have realized that buildings have an impact on health, and that people don't want to go back into buildings that are unhealthy. And if you make a building healthy for the occupants, that means that you're making the employees productive, you're lowering healthcare costs, you're increasing retention, you're lowering absenteeism. That is as order of magnitude impact on the prosperity of the business.
You are speaking of people.
We can hear you. Go ahead. It's fine.
I just want to keep you up to date on the importance of this happening. That actually has order of magnitude benefits to the business than energy efficiency does, right? So the context of energy efficiency gets lost because in Texas, energy is cheap. So if we want people to be energy efficient, we have to get them to change behaviors, and people are not going to change behaviors if it has no impact on their business model, right? So always has to come back to the business model. Now, what was missing, and I forgot to say this when you had asked about the policies, what is missing in that and what we have to have is carbon pricing. At the end of the day, there has to be some value in not doing the right thing. When you don't make an efficient building, you create a burden to the community by way of greenhouse gases and pollution. And people that build buildings that don't take advantage of the proven designs, technologies, policies, and processes that we have out there in tons of examples around the world, people that decide not to do that get the advantage of throwing that burden onto the community or the businesses or the school children that are inside of it. And they have no ramifications because they don't have to account for it. So, looking at the triple bottom line, the social, the environmental, financial impacts of our decisions, and having that data transparent and being able to hold up a lens that says, yeah, you're only required by code to do this, but best practices, you could be doing this, and all of that burden you are willingly throwing onto the community. There needs to be some ramifications for that. Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox.
No. Thank you very much. I just want to say, in case you get really excited, don't back up into that fire alarm over your shoulder, okay? While it would be very entertaining to see you get doused, I don't think it would be fun for you. So just be careful on that. So you're a utility, Rebekah, so you make electricity. And as I'm always fond of saying, that I think electricity has become number 3, right behind air and water in terms of what consumers need and demand. And so are you seeing attitudes change? And another thing that there's a term that I want to toss out in case anybody wants to pick up on it, and that's electrification, which has become a big objective. And maybe you want to talk about why that is. It's not just because it's cool, but it actually has climate impact. So consumers, electrification, if you want to talk about those things.
I'll start by the side that concerns me, the obstacles, real quick, and just talk about reliability and affordability of energy. It really, truly matters, right? And so at TVA, we are slated to bring on about 10,000 more megawatts of renewables over the next few years. And that's a lot for a system to withstand. And so obviously, when you talk to me about what keeps you up at night, it's always reliability. I don't know if you guys have been through a power outage lately, but even if my power is out for 15 minutes, my children become very panicked, right? It has become a quality of life issue that is significant. So reliability in this transition is huge. So much so that I truly believe if we cannot maintain reliability in this transition, we could actually set ourselves back from a policy standpoint and from a consumer standpoint. And so we're very focused there. That being said, consumers are hungry for cleaner energy, and we are working hard to make sure we can meet those demands in our communities around the valley. The other thing that's happening in our southeastern region that we live in the United States is a lot of economic development and those companies wanting clean energy. We were just announced a close partnership with Ford to build electric vehicles in the valley, and that investment in EVs, we're working with the state of Tennessee in the United States to make sure we can put more electric vehicles on the road. So consumers are hungry for it. There's a bit of a reluctance around reliability that we have got to make sure that as a utility, we are keeping that at the forefront. We also serve one of the poorer regions of the country, just from a average household income. So affordability really does matter. A few years back, early in the solar industry, TVA kind of subsidized solar quite a bit to kind of get that industry going in the valley. And what you found were the folks who could participate in those types of programs were wealthier people in the valley. And so then you're creating this situation where one group is subsidizing that program for another, right? And so how you price things, how you make sure you're maintaining that reliability for those consumers, that's the hard part of the utility game over the next few years.
Okay, thanks. Now I want to pick up on one thing, or Liz, do you want to jump in? Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, yeah, sorry, just, I think electrification is maybe what
yeah. I was going to ask you about that, actually.
So I think here is where we are seeing a lot of policy development in the building space, and sort of how do we take advantage of this changing grid and the increase in clean energy that's available, and also sort of have a more clearly determined outcome as far as where we're going to be 5, 10, 15 years. So looking at electrifying heating and cooling in buildings, in homes, as well as commercial and public buildings. So I think that's a place where there's like intersection of sectors. And it just, from our view, it really requires that efficiency has to be right there with that electrification, because we're going to be asking our grids to provide reliable, affordable energy that's also clean, but that's taking on more demand. So with electric vehicles and now heating and cooling over time. So sort of the timing of that is going to, I think, be challenging for utilities, and also as we sort of the building space and with especially state and local policies and incorporating those new technologies for heating and cooling, trying to make sure that's accompanied by efficiency so that you're taking advantage of that low-hanging fruit that's in your existing buildings and making sure all the new buildings are done right so that help make that part of the solution.
Yeah, and I know when I get asked about electrification by someone, or when I have to, do a quick explanation of it or whatever, I always someone gave me this, and he said I could use it, so I always do. And from the central grid standpoint, the idea behind electrification is that even though there's fossil fuels used for production of electricity, that there's more and more renewable energy coming on the grid. And so, when you use an electric appliance or whatever, then that means that you're using that much more renewable electricity. Ashley, let me pick up on the affordability part that Rebekah mentioned, and this is also to you, Jessica. I mean, affordability, do your products cost more than conventional products? And if so, how big a barrier is that?
So this is actually a really important discussion, and I was going to pick up on something that you mentioned as well, which is that, how consumers act is really, and how companies act, is really influenced by the policy. In the case you mentioned, the subsidies for renewable energy and how that really sort of changed the game. And in the food sector, that's so important. Right now, we have a lot of market distortions in the food sector. And there was a report out recently that just showed how much subsidization happens in the animal-based sector, for example. And that's really throwing off the market and throwing off the cost of our food. So it's really, really difficult for consumers to be able to compare the cost of different foods and really understand if that is, in fact, the true cost of their food. At the same time, what I think is very telling and was also mentioned is behavior change. So this really all comes down to what is driving behavior change and what influence does that have? And I think what's unique about the food industry is in the plant-based space, consumers are already speaking toward that behavior change. Consumers are, in fact, ahead of governments, even with those market distortions that are still in the food system. The demand for plant-based food has just skyrocketed over the last several years in many, many economies. Now, what we need to do to get that into a much more equitable system is to really work with policymakers to ensure that those market distortions are corrected and are really providing a level playing field for plant-based products to get to scale. And with that scale, that's where we really can achieve the affordability that makes it so important for bringing those kinds of solutions to a much, much broader population.
Yeah, so Jessica, that's an obvious segue to you, I think, in the same area of questioning. But before you say anything, let me remind those of you who might be viewing this live that you can ask us a question or you can toss a topic out that you would like to hear us discuss. And all you have to do is on the platform you're viewing this on is use the raise hand function. And we'll know that you're there waiting to talk to us. Thanks. So Jessica, affordability, challenges in terms of marketing, pricing, anything like that?
Yeah, and so plant-based products often are competing with a petroleum-based product, so suffering a similar sort of competing with those subsidies that the petroleum industry benefits from. But beyond that, it's, looking at, we want to be able to look at costs beyond just numbers. What are the environmental costs of this product, and how do we do that? When we are talking purely costs, some of our products are somewhat competitive, but others are not. This is a smaller but growing industry. There's a lot of interest, a lot of potential, but that's why one of our policy priorities relates to creating a more level playing field, be it through tax incentives or other mechanisms that do help create a more level playing field, so that the numbers cost isn't the sole driver, that you can look at other aspects of these products in making decisions about what to put out on the market, what to bring to commercialization. So there's a lot of sort of opportunity. Just to give an example, so just in plastics in general, there's I think like 400 million tons of plastics produced every year. About 1% of those are bioplastics, and there's a lot of opportunity to substitute there. But how do we get beyond that? But there's just people are used to petroleum-based plastics. They're cheap. They're for very many reasons, and so there's one, again, opportunity, but how do we create that incentive to get further into the market? And I sort of build off some of the comments made earlier. This isn't a change we can make overnight. You're not going to put some, bring a bioplastic facility online and substitute half of the plastic that's made next year. That is going to take time. And so all of these things take time. And so what can we be doing now to start to make these changes so that we can start meeting future goals? Because we can't wait till then. We need to be acting now.
Yeah, thanks. At this point, I could go on picking up on things that all of you say and turn that into some sort of question or topic for discussion. But what I'd like to offer instead is, what is it that I haven't asked you about that you would like to talk about or think the viewers of this ought to hear about or know about? And anybody can go first on that one. Liz.
I just want to pick up on Jessica's comment, because I think there's a really interesting intersection between policy and consumer demand, and we're seeing more and more the government sort of taking its procurement power and trying to use that to lead and to enable these new markets. So in the building sector, you mentioned the GAP report and the 1.5 degree report came out, which is very sobering for the building sector. That 1.5 degrees, that called for by 2030 all new construction around the globe to be zero carbon in operations and 40% reduction in embodied carbon. And that's basically all the energy that goes into the materials and construction process. So that's a really ambitious goal from where we sit right now. So that embodied, we know how to do the net zero carbon operations. We're not doing it, but we're hopefully working towards getting more and more of new construction there. But the embodied carbon is something we're still working on. How do we work on those materials? So in the bills, there is some funding and some direction for the U.S. government to work on sort of sending that signal that towards lower carbon materials for construction. And we saw earlier this week an announcement from some of the governors in the Pacific Coast Collaborative on the West Coast to also work together to try to prioritize low carbon construction materials. So I wonder if that would be an approach for the food industry as well and the plant-based products.
Yeah, well, what I think is so interesting, and what I was going to pick up is on the carbon pricing point that was made, but they're also connected, right? So, so you mentioned this, what sounds like just an astonishing level of effort that needs to be done to do net zero operations for buildings, and also 40% reduction in building materials. And I wanted to ask Jessica about the carbon numbers that she's seen for plant-based products, because yes, that sounds so ambitious, and yet in the research that we've done and that we draw from the global research on plant-based food, is that plant-based milk, so in this particular instance, not even just specifically Oatly, but oat milk, has on average globally, according to studies, around 70% less carbon than a comparable global dairy milk. And so I feel like, we have these alternatives out there. We have these alternatives that actually can make a pretty big dent in those really what seem like just far stretches that we need to achieve with the emissions reductions that we need in order to stay under 1.5 degrees. And so I'm wondering if Jessica has numbers in the plant-based product side, but I think it all is linked also to carbon pricing, because the carbon pricing then helps sort of incentivize businesses to move toward those kinds of materials, because okay, if I can make this cut in some of my carbon footprints, I'm going to be much less exposed to those carbon prices.
It helps level the playing field as in the pricing field.
Yeah.
Exactly. So Jessica, have you seen that kinds of comparison in your field as well?
We have, yeah. So, and of course, it's going to vary product by product, but actually, I'm glad you asked, because USDA just published a report over the summer through their BioPrefer program that I mentioned earlier, and they estimated that bio-based or plant-based products displace about 9.4 million barrels of oil a year and can reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 12.7 million metric ton equivalent. So that's equal to taking about 2.7 million cars off the road for a year. So there is some, some data that USDA has recently published that I think shows a lot of potential, but there's more that can be done, certainly.
Okay, Dave or Rebecca, back to sort of my toss-up question. Anything that we haven't talked about that you want to make sure the audience hears about?
Yeah, I'll just mention a few things. In the utility industry, if anyone watching this is interested in that, you know, TVA has a carbon report on our website, and the reason I send you there is kind of mirrors the conversation today. We're looking at, I think it's over 40 tools in our toolbox to reduce carbon, right? And so that's everything from building efficiency work with our communities in the Valley to the Friday before I departed for this trip, I was with farmers planting trees on riparian buffers.
Amazing.
All the way to
That's amazing.
small modular reactors and investment in hydrogen. And so the utility industry is really taking a broad approach to see what works. Some of these levers obviously move the needle more than others in
Right.
carbon. But it is important to take that broad approach as we're trying desperately to get, you know, move forward. The second thing I'll mention that I don't think we talked much about today, but that's very dear to my heart, is the idea of a just transition in all of this, but particularly for the energy sector. We are, you know, retiring some coal plant assets that have been the backbone of communities for decades, if not generations. And those employees in those communities are impacted. And we're trying very hard to make sure we mitigate that impact so that this transition carries everybody along and doesn't leave folks behind. And so, and then the last thing I'll mention is just consumer or regular folks, I'm Southern, regular folk, just overwhelmed by the amount of rhetoric and data and those kind of things coming from all of our industries around carbon and carbon impacts. And the need for us as business leaders to try to push through all of that and help folks really understand their impact individually, the impact of the products they're buying, what we can do for them as a utility provider. I just find that people are really overwhelmed a bit by the amount of carbon conversation going on and are seeking that clarity. So I think it's all a challenge to all of us. To constantly be fighting for that clarity for the people we serve. So.
Oh, yeah, thank you for introducing those points. So, Dave, before I toss it over to you, I want to pick up on, you talked about on your website, I think you said there were 40-something things. And Liz, you mentioned a 1.5 report, and is that the IPCC report?
Yes.
Which is great. The other one, though, that I thought was important in terms of listing things was the IEA report that came out just prior to that. I think that had 400 different actions that had to be taken in order to meet the, I think the 2030 and beyond targets and so on. And I would recommend that to anyone if you really want a good shopping list of the things that have to happen in all of these sectors, that the IEA lays that out pretty well there. But Dave, what haven't we talked about that you want to toss in here?
You know, this is such a great conversation. There's lots of things, and one of the things that was mentioned early on in this is at COP26 here, we're not talking about why we need to do it. We're talking about how we need to do it.
Good point.
And that is, we need to acknowledge that. That is huge. The other thing that's both good and bad news is we already have all of the designs, the technologies, the policies and processes proven to solve every single problem in the built environment. We just fail to deploy them 90% of the time. So we got to look at what institutionalized obstacles are in our way and figure out how to get around that. And the good news is that, you know, there isn't an architect or a municipal planner that I know that gets out of bed every day getting excited about building a code minimum building or community. So they are waiting for an opportunity for the solutions to do that. That excites me every day. I'm really privileged to work in that community. The other thing that I think is important, and you know, this is difficult. You know, building a building takes about 50 different professionals and trades. It is the most complicated thing you could do. Yet in a lot of buildings, if we were comparing a building to a car, it'd be like driving a car down the road with the windows blacked out and only a fuel gauge on the dashboard. So we talk a lot about smart buildings. All of that technology is there. Doing embedded carbon. I do those analyses for clients so they can get extra lead points, but it's not a requirement. And they don't do it up front. They just want the points, right? So there's things that we can do as an organization within USGBC by making, I know this is getting into the minutia, but making life cycle analysis a requirement, making triple bottom line cost benefit analysis a requirement, looking at how do we actually perform. I was up in the front of the Texas legislature this summer for the first session, not any of the other ones that followed, but we stayed engaged, just trying to get better ventilation and filtration in schools. We have millions of school children every day. No school ever being built in Texas is required to monitor what the air quality is inside of the school. And most of them will never have, well, actually no school in Texas will ever have great air quality because we don't design to great air quality. We design to acceptable air quality. And if we don't even measure that, you know exactly what you're getting. So as an industry, we have an ability to use tools that are already out there to collect the data, be able to visualize that, bring that data at the right time so we have data ready, decision-ready data, and then provide the data on how it's operating. We should be holding ourselves accountable. We should be holding the designers accountable. We say, I don't have a problem if you measure what the indoor environmental quality in my building, energy, and everything else for the rest of the life of the building because I've designed it properly, right? That is not our industry. We need to get better at that. Yeah. So,
right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Okay, so we're down to the exit round, and you've got 3 choices. Okay, one is, you can take any of them if you want. Okay, all right. So one of these is, here we are at the COP, right. And we're, while some are international, we're really talking about the American business community here. As I said in my introduction, there's a lot of focus on America in terms of our role in all of this. And so in speaking to the rest of the world in your last 45 seconds, is there something you want to say? Or door number 2 would be a prediction that you'd like to make. Or door number 3 would be whatever you would like to say in your 45 minutes. So, Rebekah, we'll go to you.
I will just say this is my first COP that I've attended. I continue to meet people who've been here for like 20-something COPs or whatever, but it is a very exciting time because we are focused on solutions. And you walk around the pavilion and in the sessions, and you're hearing ideas and solutions and implementation and deployment, right? And that is very exciting. So I'll just say to the folks watching this either live or later on that just the fact that you're watching this and that you're concerned about these issues and that you're working with us, hats off to you and the work you're doing. I have met so many people here who have dedicated their lives to this issue and moving this forward. I don't have my crystal ball at the ready, but I'll just say I will leave here more heartened about the direction and being able to do it the right way than I was when I came. So I think that's a win for the week.
Okay, thanks. Liz?
I think being here, I'm more acutely aware of the urgency than before, and especially reading the different reports that have come out in the last few months. So that's really front and center. And I think with respect to the technical aspects of the decision that comes out of COP, we hope that the high ambition group prevails and that we do see something really strong. We need strong accountability with frequent data reporting from the party countries. And that's another thing on the table. So I think those are a couple of the main things. And then, just sort of looking at our little role in this puzzle and in these solutions, just trying to help get these federal investments going, make the most of them by collaborating across, everyone in our sector and with state and local government and utilities, and then just start over because we don't have time to pause. So, go right into, the next thing and keep pushing farther and farther because we have to get to the net zero goal.
Ashley.
I'm going to choose door 3, the grab bag.
Okay.
And I'm going to kind of anticipate if I was in the audience, what would I ask? And this is a question that I often get, which is like, okay, that's fine and good, great. Companies are doing good stuff. And hopefully you can see by this panel that there's a lot of companies in a lot of sectors that are really working towards solutions. But what can I do as just a person out here? Like, what can I do? And I think what's so encouraging to me is that what I've heard in our discussion so far is that there's something that people can do in their everyday lives in every single one of our sectors. People can choose to purchase renewable energy. People can, for their houses, et cetera. People can find ways to make where they live or where they work more efficient, either by, asking their landlords to do so or putting in place so many different efficiency measures on their own. People can choose a more plant-based diet. People can look for products that are more transparent about what their carbon footprint is and really choose to transform their diet in a way that is going to have a lower emission impact. And I think that is so inspiring to me, at least, that not only can I be here trying to influence policymakers to do the right thing so that we can accelerate that transition, but that I as an individual and my neighbors and my community can also make these decisions within our lives that can really have a measurable difference.
And let's go to either Dave or Jessica on that. Your last comment?
I'll jump in. So I'll just say, from here in my basement in Alexandria, Virginia, there's a bit of FOMO going on with all the work that you all are seeing happening. But it's, going back to my comment at the beginning, I think it's encouraging from our perspective to see the increased discussions of the circular economy, thinking more about the role that the circular economy can play in addressing our climate crisis. And I think looking to the future and seeing that grow, I think will be, maybe if I had a crystal ball, I hope that that's what I would see when I look into it, that there's more recognition that we need to be thinking about what are we making, what's happening in its life cycle, including all the way to the end, and that gets to some of the composting and end-of-life issues. But I look forward to this discussion continuing and growing into the future.
All right, thanks. Dave.
Yeah, so I'll only put one leg on my soapbox here to end today. Just before this session, I was over at Bloomberg Green in City Centre at Glasgow listening to John Kerry interview. And it's obvious that the current administration is committed to our future that is a place where both humans and nature thrive. So that was really super encouraging. It's also obvious from the panel discussion today that it's not going to happen immediately. Methane as a major fuel is going to be around for a long time. As a matter of fact, in the presentation just before John Kerry, they were talking about masks for cows to capture the methane when they burp. So methane is a problem, but if we, do things right, we can use it as a fuel source. This is just one example of all the innovation and the opportunity that is out there. I think that, as we are working with passionate individuals to come up and address all these problems, it's complicated. But I think with the right direction from up top and, developing better communications and bridging what I'll call, and this is the last thing I'll say, the gap between what inhabitants expect. We automatically have this unrealistic expectation that we can just walk into a building and you don't have to worry about it, right? I mean, minimum code just ensures that the building doesn't kill you immediately when you walk into it. It doesn't mean it's not going to shave weeks, months, or years off the end of your life by being it. So we have this whatever expectation of all the professionals that build buildings and communities that we don't even have to think about it. In reality, there's lots of things we can improve that on the way that we build and operate buildings that could make the inhabitants a whole lot healthier and a whole lot more prosperous.
Great. Thanks, Dave. I'm going to have to stop you there, but thanks for that. So in wrapping up, let me thank my fellow participants or discussants here. It's always a pleasure to be with another expert in the utility industry. Always great to chat with my friends in the building space, as well as my new friends in what I've now learned to call the plant-based food space.
All right.
And so I also want to thank those of you who have viewed this. If you have any questions for any of the individuals here, or any of the other companies that make up the Business Council, you can contact the Business Council, and I'm sure the staff there will arrange to connect you to any of us or help you in other ways as well. And I want to thank Laura from BCSE staff for organizing this event, and I know, speaking for myself, we've had a lot of fun.
It's been great.
So thank you all.
Great job moderating.
Yes,
Thank you.
very good.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.